Mike Vrabel is the new head coach of the New England Patriots. I'll just say he's got to be worried about this football team. Probably the worst roster in the NFL.
That doesn't affect me one bit.
They got to go against Josh Allen twice a year, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. There's got to be some fear there.
Doesn't affect me one bit.
Also, Michigan football, Bryce Underwood, is he the new big superstar at Michigan going to destroy Ohio State?
That doesn't affect me.
But clearly nothing bothers Mike Vrabel and nothing bothers this New England Patriots team. We are going to be talking all about the New England Patriots today and going through a roster breakdown, a mock draft, free agency strategy, you name it. Let's talk about it. So let's begin with this roster, right? Because the roster in general, there are a lot of holes. And let's be real, this roster has a lot of work to do. Now they have the most amount of... So it is kind of funny, but they need to address a lot of areas in free agency and in the draft. So they're going to be having to spend some money, plus hopefully getting a couple of starters in this year's draft class. And talking about the offensive tackle room here, this is where some of that money needs to be used right away. I mean, you got veteran Lowe, not a terrible player. I mean, I love the guy's story. He's got a good family, hardworking guy. Certainly somebody that I think you can keep around and be a really good backup, be a good swing tackle. As a starter, though, you need to upgrade here. This is priority number one, that left tackle of the future. And DeMontre Jacobs, while a good story as well, a pickup there, and he filled in with valiant effort. It was rough, and they're going to have to clearly find a right tackle to be the future here as well. So finding two starting tackles is extremely challenging. Finding one starting tackle is extremely challenging. Whether or not you believe in Caden Wallace, that's still, at this point, you cannot bank on that. You really would just have to have him go in there, compete with either a rookie or a free agent, and then see how things go from there. If he wins the job, then great. But at the same time, this is number one priority. Let's go on to the interior of the offensive line now. And for Doug Marrone, who's the new offensive line coach, this is something they can build and work with here. Now, you got Mike Onwenu, right? He's certainly a locked-in starter at right guard, and that's the way Elliott Wolf has already talked about. Granted, Mike Vrabel is kind of the GM in ways here. But if you want to take what that word is, you kind of want to keep Mike Onwenu over there at right guard, and it makes sense. I think that's his best position. And then it'd be nice to just not keep having to move him around, to just say, hey, look, you're playing right guard. That's where you can focus your attention on. Come in at a good weight this offseason, and we can roll from there. Because Onwenu is a really good football player. Just got to make sure that weight is under control, and you're in a good spot there with him. David Andrews at center. There are some questions here, and it just comes down to the injury. Same thing with Cole Strange. I love both of these football players, and if it weren't for the injury risks, then I would be looking at this and saying David Andrews is your center, Cole Strange your left guard. I feel like this is a good interior. I love Cole Strange. I think he's a way better football player than what he gets credit for. On film, I've watched film of Cole Strange, and I like him. I think he is a very good football player. It just he's been injured. That's been the big thing with Cole Strange. So we'll see what happens. I thought he played well, too, at the end of the season. It was the end of the season for some backups, too, in the Buffalo Bills game. Overall, Strange at the center position really would be a great option for them for the long haul as well. So I think it'd be a seamless transition from David Andrews to Cole Strange. Just comes down to those injury risks. I'm going to, just for the ease of this, because we can't bank on these guys being healthy next year. We've been burned one too many times with that. So what you need to be looking at is finding at least another guy on this interior of the offensive line, whether that's the draft, free agency. But luckily, like I talked about, your hope is at least one of those guys can stay healthy. And Ben Brown's a solid depth player too, stepped up when they needed him to. So he could factor into this offensive line as well. But Andrews, Strange, my hope is one of those guys is your center. Let's find one more guy to go next. Layden Robinson, I just don't know if I feel confident with him going into next season as a starter. So Michael Onwenu, David Andrews, Cole Strange, some combination there at center. We got to figure out that left guard position. Let's go on to the tight end room though now. And you got two really good tight ends in here this season, Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. Hooper had a great connection to Drake May, as did Hunter Henry. So I think in general, my goal would just be bringing back Austin Hooper. Now, they may not do that just strictly to get a little cheaper, which would also make sense. Overall, this is not the top priority need. I think it's something you could look at later in the draft. If somebody falls to you can't pass up, sure, you take them. But at the end of the day, Hunter Henry's a good tight end. He's a solid blocker, a solid receiver. If you can bring Austin Hooper back, then great. You're in a really good position here. Jaheim Bell is a developing utility man, certainly can help them out. Giovanni Ricci getting back healthy as a hybrid fullback, which Josh McDaniels will use in this offensive system. This is where my bigger priorities lie, though, is at the wide receiving position. They have to find help here. It is the number one need, other than offense tackle, I would say, on this roster. Well, I mean, you can make the argument edge rusher, more defensive line in general is definitely a big need too, but this is certainly up there. So whether it's a trade, a DK Metcalf, right? Who knows? Chris Godwin in free agency. I mean, there's some guys out there. Brandon Ayuk, I'm hearing rumors that he might get traded too. We shall see how it all works out. No matter what, though, you have to add a weapon. You have to add somebody here that defenses be like, oh, okay, we got a game plan around this guy, right? This is, we gotta take this seriously. Right now, they don't have that. I mean, Kayshon Boutte, not terrible. Definitely a nice deep threat for this team. Kendrick Bourne, I do think may end up getting cut. Still, we'll see. He's not a bad football player. He did show a little bit better, especially as the season went on, as he got more healthy and whatnot. He is a solid football player. So if they want to keep him around, he's not like extravagant of a cap hit. Ultimately, it's going to depend on who they sign and how comfortable they feel going into the draft and free agency on whether or not he'll be back next season. Demario Douglas, good solid slot receiver, and Josh McDaniels done a good job like schematically around slot receivers. So I think Pop Douglas could have a really good year next season. And it doesn't hold me back from drafting somebody that can also play in the slot because Josh McDaniels has worked with multiple slot receivers too in the past. I'm not super worried about it. I think Demario Douglas will be a really good playmaker for Josh McDaniels in this offense going forward. You need to see some development of Jalen Polk. No matter what, you had to have competition. That's just what it is. Same thing with Javon Baker. Your hope is that some of those guys step up from last draft class. At the end of the day, though, like we got to add more talent. We can't rely on that. We got to make sure that we're giving Drake May enough pieces. Let's go on to the running back room now. And this is an area that they certainly could upgrade. Like this running back room this season was definitely a little bit of a disappointment. Antonio Gibson was their best running back this season. He's a really good receiving weapon. And when we talk about Josh McDaniels loving the James White, well, I think Antonio Gibson can be like the James White for Josh McDaniels in this offense. So I expect him to have a really good a more prominent receiving role even next season. Ramondre Stevenson, as that every down back, they need to add more competition here. Clearly, Ramondre Stevenson, I don't know, but maybe it's just you got to work on that ball security first and foremost. Didn't look the same in general. So hoping that Ramondre Stevenson has a bounce back season next year. But I will be looking to add competition. Is it something I'm going to spend money on in free agency? No. This isn't, even though they do have the money, but you're already spending $10 million between these two running backs. I'm not looking to spend any more on that. Let's go to the draft, right? This is something where third, fourth, fifth round, there's a lot of value right there. You can find somebody in that mid-round range that can be a really good back behind Antonio Gibson, Ramondre Stevenson. Then we go on to the quarterback position. Drake May. I'm not ready to crown him as the franchise quarterback yet. I like him, and I think he's going to be a guy that certainly could be the franchise quarterback. At the same time, I do want to see another season or two from Drake May. There were a lot of turnover-worthy plays. He's another guy that's got to work on ball security. However, there's also a lot of really good flashes you look at throughout the season, and he made some game-winning plays. He made some really nice throws. Like, the talent is all there with Drake May. So certainly you're going to next season. I'm not saying Joe Milton is a starter, okay? Joe Milton, certainly not. I don't think he is better than Drake May, at least not at this point. You keep Joe Milton as a backup, and you never know what you have, just in case, of course. But at the same time, I feel confident Drake May is certainly a guy that I think we can hang our hats on. This is not something I'm like super worried about at this point. I think he can be the franchise quarterback. Let's go on to the defense now and start off with the edge rushers. And this is, I was saying earlier, this is arguably one of the biggest needs on the roster as well, is finding some more edge talent. They got to get more pressure in general on the quarterback defense line. Mike Vrabel's alluded to this, is let's get more talent on this defense line. Let's get after the quarterback. And another thing, schematically wise, they will change from more of a control system to more of a one gap penetrating style of defense, especially when we move into the interior of the defensive line. And I expect them to run like 4-2-5 a lot more this next season, a lot more nickel personnel, things like that. So you look at this roster right now, Anthony Jennings, good solid run defender, and then you got Keon White. A lot of flashes at the beginning of the season. We need to see more consistency because I feel like he went a little cold as the season went along. I didn't see him a whole ton out there in the games, but certainly a guy with a lot of talent and a lot of traits. And as I talked about earlier, I think he's going to benefit as much as anybody in this scheme to say, hey, let's pin your ears back. Let's go after the quarterback. You don't have to always control. Let's go get the quarterback. That should help out this group in general. Denetrich Wise, who's guy can play a little inside out. I don't know if they're going to re-sign him. I imagine they're going to try to get a little younger, get a little better in that regard in general / upgrade. Not saying that Denetrich Wise is a bad player, and he's been a really solid player for this Patriots football team for a very long time now. Overall, though, we're going to be looking to improve. You got a Shane Zimenez, unfortunately got injured early on. so you didn't quite get to see. I mean, he had a promising camp and whatnot. Certainly a guy that you could bring back on the cheap if you wanted to. That's just going to come down to Mike Vrabel and Terrell Williams, how they feel schematically, what they want to do, what players they want to bring in, right? So my view on this is a early need possibly in the draft, free agency, you name it. Like, they got to improve it. And the same thing could be said about this defensive tackle position, which they have to look to improve. Now, getting Christian Barmore back just healthy is going to be in its own right like a huge benefactor for this football team. But who's going to be that guy next to him? They've already said or given permission for Devon Gotchow to go out and seek a trade. He just doesn't fit with the new scheme. As I talk about, like, Gotchow is a really good run defender. He's one of the better run defenders in the NFL. He can hold the point of attack. Now, teams were picking on him this season because it's like they know he was the one guy on that interior could hold the point of attack. So they're just double teaming him like crazy. Anyway, like, Gotchow should have some trade possibilities out there. Like, some teams are going to want to trade for this guy because he is good at what he does. It just comes down to, for this football team, they're going to be trying to get more one gap penetrators. Barmore is going to be a huge beneficiary of this new system. And I think he, if fully healthy, could have a 8+ sack season next year. You got some depth. Daniel Aquale is a free agent, so we have to keep an eye out on that. I don't know if he's going to be back or not. He got taken advantage of a little bit in the run game this season, man, because he's more of a situational pass rusher in my eyes, not a gap integrity type of guy, and that's fine. So we'll see what they want to do with him. He might be a better scheme fit, actually, for this new system. Jeremiah Farms Jr., another dude that's been a solid rotational player for them. Jaquelin Roy. I actually thought Jaquelin Roy had some really nice reps this season. I saw him make some plays throughout this season. So we'll highlight on him, and maybe he can be a nice developmental piece for this room. But this is certainly an area we can look at in the draft, free agency, in a combination of both. They need depth and they need another starter, especially if they're going to trade Devon Gotchow. And then go on to the linebacking core here, and you look at Juwan Bentley, still under contract for one more season. You got Jelani Tavai also under contract. This team will be transitioning to more of a coverage-based role with these linebackers, a little more versatility. Right now, they got some good run defenders, but their coverage ability isn't quite where it needs to be. So that's another thing. Like, I think we need to find another linebacker that is a little bit better coverage ability in this room. So I'll be looking at that between free agency and the draft. Christian Ellis actually was a pretty good football player, filled in for injuries for Juwan Bentley this season. Really good blitzer, actually, too. Somebody that I definitely saw making some big-time plays throughout the season. So he's a guy that maybe, could end up taking over for Jelani Tavai at some point here soon, and you could save a little bit of money there. Or even, Juwan Bentley could be a surprise cap casualty, too, for this team. Not that they need the money. Maybe you just keep him for the leadership purposes as well. In general, though, I want to find somebody else in this linebacking room. This could be a draft need as well, depending on what they do in free agency. Then we go on to the cornerback room. Now, this is a little bit more simple for me. Jonathan Jones, I do think, had a really rough season. I'm not saying you don't bring him back. It depends on what Mike Vrabel, once again, in this new coaching. It is so difficult to project. That's why I keep mentioning it. Like, when you have a new coaching staff, you've got some sort of ideas on what they want to do. But at the same time, like, you don't know exactly. Terrell Williams is going to be his own self coming over from Detroit. He's going to put his own unique spin on things as that defensive line guy. So I expect some things, to look at in different ways in Mike Vrabel's past. And we talk about what he wants to do, like 4-2-5. I think he'll be very variable too with his coverage maneuverability, but he'll play to his personnel. And I think he'll play plenty of man coverage. But you got Christian Gonzalez, your number one corner. You got Marcus Jones, a solid slot corner. You got a little bit of depth with Alec Austin, who's a restricted free agent. They can bring him back on the cheap. Isaiah Bolden, also a nice solid depth piece. My view on this is, let's go get a guy, go add somebody in free agency. Since you got a lot of guys on rookie contracts, you're not spending a whole ton of money here. This just opens the door to upgrade that cornerback 2 spot opposite of Christian Gonzalez. That, to me, is really where you're looking at. This is not necessarily a draft need unless they just feel like overly whelmed that they're going to go get Travis Hunter or whatever like that. I don't think he'll be available at that point. It is certainly something they could consider. However, like, for me, this is more of a free agency type of priority, finding a number 2 quarterback, than it is a draft need. Now, moving on to the safety room, this is kind of the exact opposite of what I was saying with the cornerback position. Well, they've got a lot of box safeties here. Like, they got a lot of guys that can cover tight ends, be mismatch pieces in the box, hybrid players. Who's the guy that's the free safety, right? You've been looking for the Devin McCourty replacement for quite the minute. Well, we don't have one yet. I mean, Jalen Hawkins was really their best free safety this season. Jabril Peppers is dealing with his own legal issues, so those are still things. I mean, I know it was a non-guilty verdict, and hopefully those things clear up, and he'll be back with the football team next season. He is under contract, and you really can't get out of the cap too much. I mean, you could post June 1st if you want to. I just don't know right now. What I don't know with Jabril Peppers, how the team feels with him. He's a good football player when he's out there. I mean, he makes a lot of plays. However, you do have some of those things you have to think about. what is this new coaching staff going to want? You got Kyle Duggar already. You got Marte Mapu, who's a good, solid box player as well, who can cover in the back end, like brings versatility there. So if you wanted to, you could bring back Jalen Hawkins. I also think there's an area where they could upgrade this position and kind of fill it once and for all. They're spending money on Jabril Peppers, Kyle Duggar. So why not bring in a little bit more youth in here as that true free safety? That's why I say this is more of a draft need. But if a Javon Holland comes your way and you just can't pass up on that, if he wants to come to New England, I think that makes a lot of sense too. Another guy I do want to mention, Del Pettis from Troy, who was a undrafted free agent. He actually stepped up this season too, so it's a nice piece. He's kind of a guy with some size and some explosiveness who can cover some tight ends and stuff like that. So he's another guy that, might fill some of that role too. So they got a lot of those type of guys on this roster. But here we go. It's free agency time. And man, oh man, the Patriots got to feel good about this cap space that they have. They're going to be able to spend some serious money. They've got a lot of liquidity on their hands right now. So we'll see what they want to do, but we're going to start off with the team cuts and a trade here as well. Kendrick Bourne, I decided to release him. We're going to go ahead and try to upgrade here, and I think we can find some upgrades at this wide receiving room. And Devon Gotchow, we're going to trade him for a late 2026 pick, maybe mid to late round pick. I don't know what it's exactly going to be. We're just going to factor that in later. It could be a 2025 pick. I just don't want to mess up the draft order and whatnot, but that could definitely be in the cards for this football team very easily. And then moving on to the UDFAs here for the football team. I think, really you could see a couple of these guys brought back. I just brought back Austin Hooper. I like him as this number 2 tight end. I thought he was at a really good chemistry with Drake May. So I gave him a 2-year, $8 million deal. Seems very fair as well. And even $5 million a season, I wouldn't be against that either. I do think he's worth that price point. Now, other guys they could bring back, I could see some of these guys, like, for example, Jalen Hawkins, depending on what they want to do in free agency in the draft. Daniel Quale, but might be a better scheme fit for them. O'Shane Zimenez, maybe they give him a chance. Who knows? But in general, I just felt like there was some better upgrades that we can find in free agency in the draft, and that's kind of the way that I went there. And then restricted free agents, pretty much bring everyone back. Lester Cotton, I just didn't bring back because I feel like we got enough offensive line depth. Like, I want to find some upgrades here as well. So who knows, right? These are guys that are going to compete for roster spots anyway when it goes down to it. And then, we'll see if they end up making the final cut there in the roster. Certainly some of these guys I like Alex Austin and Christian Ellis, Ben Brown. I think those are guys that really, and Jaqual Jackson had a nice free agent or a preseason game. So that's something to keep an eye on too. Then we go on to here we go, right? Here's the big money spend. You got $100 and almost $30 million to spend. And you got about $9-10 million that's going to be a draft capital estimate on this. It could be a little bit more, it could be a little less, depending on who they sign and whatnot from that draft class. But you look at it here, I want to first off, a cheap veteran, third quarterback. That's really all they need. I think Joe Milton can step up into that backup role, but someone like Brett Ribbon or Kyle Allen, etc., just a little bit of veteran presence to continue to be a mentor for Drake May, something like that in the room certainly could help. A guy that's been there, done that sort of thing. Here we go, though. You got Chris Godwin, first big signing, 3 years, $90 million. $30 million average. It's a lot, but he should be fully healthy, right? He's coming off an ankle dislocation. It's not like it's an ACL or Achilles or anything like that. And I think Chris Godwin still has 2-3+ years of prime Chris Godwin left, or at least a couple of years left of Chris Godwin being prime. Like, he's still an elite receiver. He showed that this season. He was legit one of the best wide receivers before getting injured. Dan Moore, coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers, 3 years, $42 million, $14 million average. I think Dan Moore had a sneaky good season this year. I mean, I thought at the end of the year it was a little bit tailed off, but in general, I thought Dan Moore was pretty dang good this season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we're going to bring him over here. And Ronnie Stanley is certainly an option for this football team too. Dan Moore's been so reliable through his career, and I don't want to jinx him or anything like that. I'm knocking on wood right now, but I think Dan Moore comes in, brings reliability to this offensive line at the left tackle position, and should at least ensure that it's not a glaring hole. Evan Brown, we're also going to bring in on a 2-year, $16 million deal, $8 million average. He has been a very solid guard, center, versatility as well, which is what I like with Evan Brown. He also has versatility to play center, so if things don't work out with David Andrews, with Cole Strange, or Ben Brown, or whatever, right, then Evan Brown, in an emergency situation, can play center as well. So I like that versatility. Eddie Pinheiro, let's go ahead and solidify the kicker position here. Coming over from Carolina, 2 years, $8 million for average. Very solid kicker. Gets that squared away, nipped in the butt. And then on the defense side of the ball, Malcolm Kuntz, our first big signing, 2 years, $36 million. A guy with elite upside. I mean, what he showed before injury is a guy that can be a true number one pass rusher. So I want to add some more juice off the edge, and he can be this team and come in right away, hopefully be fully healthy, ready to go in training camp. It shouldn't be any reason for him not. He's had a full season now to recover. And yeah, he should be ready to go and ready to kick some butt on that defensive line. And then you got DeMarcus Walker, familiarity. I just think that with him getting released, you can get him on a cheap 1-year, $5 million deal, not super expensive. He is a good football player. The Bears just released him because they feel like they can upgrade, and they're probably having eyes on somebody big in free agency, and I totally respect that. And Walker comes in and is that number three guy for this football team. And he also has versatility on rush packages to play on the inside as well. And then here we go. Milton Williams, another big signing. 3 years, $66 million, $22 million average. He's going to come in next to Christian Barmore, and you talk about adding some game wreckers on this defensive line. Malcolm Kuntz and Milton Williams certainly going to do that here. Spending a bit of money, but they do have that, so we're going to go and afford that luxury to Milton Williams and give him a big contract. Then you got Jermaine Sherwood from the Jets. Got to steal a Jets player, right? That's just in the blood. That's what they seem to do. And Jermaine Sherwood, going to be the guy, 2 years, $16 million. And as a Jets fan, I do like Jermaine Sherwood. He's a very good football player. And as a former safety, he does have those coverage instincts, and he can play in the back end, no problem. Asante Samuel Jr., little bloodlines, right? Dad got drafted here. Let's go ahead and correct our mistake by letting the dad go, bring the son in here on a 3-year, $45 million deal. Fits the scheme as well. He's going to be that playmaker opposite of Christian Gonzalez. Like, yeah, he struggles sometimes with physicality, but you got Christian Gonzalez. Gonzalez is going to handle those physical outside wide receivers. Samuel's going to be that playmaker on the opposite end. Like, this is the 1-2 punch you dream about. And then, of course, Marcus Jones in the slot. And then Brandon Echols, fill out some more depth. He can play in the slot as well on the outside, just for injury purposes. Got to have that backup cornerback. Now, that does leave us with some money, but I don't want to spend everything, right? We do need to still consider the future and keeping some money for free agents after the draft, things like that, right? So I want to make sure we have a little bit of money for later if we need it. Let's go on to the roster, though, now and talk about one more time going into this draft. What are the needs? Let's highlight things after free agency. We still need a tackle. That's still priority number one. You got to find 2 tackles in this draft. So we're going to be looking at finding a draft early. Okay, let's just be real. We don't need to foreshadow nothing. It's self-explanatory. We got to find another tackle. Whether it's Will Campbell, Armin Embu, whoever you're high on, right? You're trade down, you get Josh Simmons or Josh Connolly, getting one of those guys, Kelvin Banks, you name it, got to get one. And then I wouldn't hate drafting a guard or just another interior offensive lineman later on. Certainly could always do that and see if you can hit on somebody, but I don't think it's a huge need. It's tackle for sure. Wide receiver. Feel better about it with Chris Godwin? We're not done yet. We're going to continue to add to this room. While it's not a first or second round, maybe it could still be a second round need, but it's not maybe a first round need at this point. It's still an area we want to attack and make sure we're adding in playmakers. Tight end could be a late round pick. That's about it. But I would say more of a utility man / hybrid fullback is going to be what I'm looking at too in this scheme. And then quarterback, we're good to go. Running back, I do want to add somebody here like late day 2 / early day 3. I think that's really where the sweet spot is for finding somebody else besides Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson. Defensively wise, still want to get some more defensive line. Like, I still want to see them go after a defensive tackle like on day 2 and maybe an edge rusher on day 2 as well. Like, those are both areas I'm still going to be keen on adding to. I mean, I feel good about this edge room with Kuntz, Jennings, Walker, and White, but at the same time, like, they could still use some more edge talent. And then interior, same thing wise. They need a little bit more depth in here. I mean, you got Farms Jr. and Roy, Jaquelin Roy, and Mill Williams and Christian Barmore is an elite starting group, but I want to get a rotational 1 tech in this room. And then you got a cornerback position that I think should be good to go. We got depth with Brendan Echols. You got your 3 starters. And Alex Austin, too, is shown to be a good backup. Isaiah Bolden, not really a draft need at this point. Yeah, I'm giving this the check mark. I mean, you could always draft corners, but in general, I think they're in a pretty good spot. Linebacker is probably a late round throw. Let's go ahead and find somebody that can develop in here. But I think going into next season, we should be good to go with Jermaine Sherwood, Jelani Tavai, Christian Ellis, and Jawan Bentley. And then finally, safety. I am looking at a safety. This is something I want to find a free safety. They got a lot of strong safeties in this room, a lot of box guys. Let's go ahead and find that true ball hawk. That's something this team really does need, and they just don't have in the back end right now. Woo! It's draft time, and here we go, New England. We start off with this number 4 overall pick. I can't wait to hear the comments on this one. Armin Embu, the offensive tackle from Missouri. What a combine. And when you're in the same conversation, numbers-wise, in the past decades, with Trent Williams and Tristan Wirfs, like being in that conversation athletically, size-wise, profile, that's something that I take note of. This kid literally has elite traits. And he's what, 20 years old right now? Super young player that's going to continue to get better. Now, I did a full film study on him, and one thing I really noticed with him that he's got to get better on is his hand technique. But at the end of the day, like, you can coach that. That is one of the easier, I'm not saying it's easy to coach, but out of all the things, I can work with those hand technique things. If you're an NFL coach, if you have to teach them, hey, let's get your hands inside a little bit more consistently. Let's work on your punch. That way you're not maybe getting beat, and you can work on that arm length deficiency. Even though he's got almost 34-inch arms, he's got like, what, 33 and a half or something like that, which is fine. That definitely is the threshold, is 33 inches. And that's what we're a little bit more reasons why I went, even though Will Campbell is the safer play, Armin Embu has elite upside. Like, I could see Embu being a top tier, top 10 tackle in the NFL. So I'm shooting for upside. It just depends on, like I said, do you want floor? Do you want upside? Not saying Will Campbell can't be a really good tackle. I see Will Campbell as a guy like someone like a Taylor Decker type, whereas Armin Embu could hit the Zach Tom or the Tristan Wirfs type of ceiling, right? Though that's kind of the mold you're looking at here. So it just kind of comes down to what you're looking at here. Armin Embu, the talent with this guy is there. The power, the raw power at such a young age. The athletic profile, it's all there. He is a tackle. In my opinion, he will play tackle in the NFL. I'm not worried about that. He's got like an 82-inch wingspan, plenty enough to play tackle. The big thing is just working on your hand usage and really developing your craft there. And hey, that was something Tristan Wirfs had to really work on too. Let's go on to our second round pick, Xavier Watts. We find that free safety. We finally get that Devin McCourty heir apparent here with Xavier Watts, a guy that is a true ball hawk. And while he doesn't maybe have Devin McCourty level speed, he's certainly a good athlete. He has enough sideline to sideline range. His instincts are incredible. This is a guy that's a tried-true player. He's seen a lot of different things. He's super smart and somebody that comes in here and literally is going to give them that elite playmaker in the back end. Maybe a Xavier McKinney, you name it, somebody like that is going to be a reliable force in the back. And he's not a bad tackler either. Like, he can come down, he can lay a hit too. He's not just a ball hawk and safety. Like, he can come down and play, and he's not afraid of nothing. So I think Xavier Watts, yes, he's not the lead athlete, but he is a very solid athlete and a very good football player. Then we go on to Trey Harris. I said we were not done at the wide receiver position. I meant it. Trey Harris, going to add another big-bodied wide receiver. We got Chris Godwin, who's going to play in the slot and on the outside, of course. And Josh McDaniels, as I mentioned earlier, he can work with two slot receivers. He's done it before. He can do it again. You got Pop Douglas and Chris Godwin, and Godwin can play on the outside as well. So, like, I'm not, like, super worried about this. They'll work it all in and out. And then you got Trey Harris to be another outside weapon with Kayshon Boutte. So you're trying to continue to fill out this wide receiving room. I think Harris has true wide receiver one potential as well. There's some injury concerns. I like him, though, man. The more I watch Trey Harris, the more I could see him being better than some of these other guys drafted in front of him in the first round. He certainly has all the traits you look for. There are just some injury questions with him that you're going to have to, vet that process. Is he an elite separator? No, but he does separate in short area quickness. I think he's got enough burst, and with that size profile at 6'2.5", basically 205, like, he truly gives you that outside X. He's got solid speed. He can separate deep as well. So I really think Trey Harris is going to be a steal for them and add another playmaker. And then we go on to Joshua Farmer, the interior pass rusher at Florida State, very raw. He is a guy that probably is not going to see a ton of the field early on, at least not as a pass rusher, but he's got the athletic burst. He's got the juice. It just comes down to his hands are so raw. He does not know how to utilize a pass rush plan right now and get after the quarterback consistently. He really just wins off athleticism and shooting gaps, which is going to be fine. Like, he's going to be a one-gap shooter. Like, that's really what his best scheme fit, in my opinion, is in a 4-3 defense as a one-tech, a rotational one-tech. They can also play a little 3-tech too, but he is going to add some more depth onto that defensive line. I want to make sure we're building that front and that wall there on that defensive interior. And then we go Ollie Gordon, running back from Oklahoma State, had a down season, right? And you worry at some of the things with him. Sometimes he's a little bit too hesitant at the line. I'd love to see him just kind of get the ball, go. You're not a guy that's super shifty, right? You're not Bucky Irvin. You can't juke guys out of your shoes right away. Like, that's not his game. And I think that's going to be something that you got to coach at and say, hey, look, and the offensive line at Oklahoma State did take a step back this season. However, still, I thought Ollie Gordon, going back to the film of 2023, this guy shows the elite traits. He's got better speed than people think he does. Another thing I will say, he does run a little high, so maybe you can work on that pad level, and that will increase your strength too in breaking more tackles, even though he can break some tackles. And he's actually a better receiver too than I think people give him credit for. And he also needs to work on pass pro. Okay, I think his pass pro took a bit of a dip this season as well. I thought he was better in 2023 in general in that regard too. Overall, though, Ollie Gordon going to add another back with Ramondre Stevenson. Antonio Gibson's going to be that receiving back role. Let's go on to our 5th-round pick, Ja Joyner. This is going to be a local Connecticut kid, a guy that comes in here and is a total developmental project. Another guy that has really no pass rush plan at this point. He also needs to get stronger at the point of attack, but he is going to be a guy with traits. He's got 34-inch arms. He's got solid athletic profile, and you can develop these guys. I take chances on athletes here in the 5th round on the edge, just building up the depth some more as the 5th edge rusher. We go on to Joe Huber from Wisconsin. You know those offensive linemen at Wisconsin, they're all built differently, good size. Needs to get a little stronger, of course. I still think he can add about 10 pounds of muscle mass. He's a solid athlete, not an elite one, but he tested well at the combine. He was like 5'2", and he ran a good shuttle time as well. So he showed off enough athleticism for me where it's, especially on film, he's got a decent first step. I think he's very scheme versatile as well. I mean, they're going to play more of a gap system, I would imagine, for Josh McDaniels. I'm not worried, though. I think Joe Huber can play either or and add some more depth on that offensive line, whether it's center or guard. And then we got Bam Martin Scott, the linebacker from South Carolina. And he, you talk about Demetrius White being a lot of the talk there at South Carolina. Now, look, Martin Scott is an older football player. I think he'll be 25 or something like that. So that's why he's going to be a later round pick, probably too. He's a solid athlete, though. I really like him. He was a really good blitzer, and he could also cover. Like, he's not just a blitzer. He's not just a box guy. He definitely has coverage ability as well. I saw him make some big-time plays this season. So you add in just somebody who's probably going to play core special teams for them early on, and at some point, maybe he, gets a bigger role. You just never know, right? Throw a dart at it. On to our final pick, Brant Kuithe, the tight end from Utah. He's going to be a utility guy, right? I don't know if he's got the size to play tight end at the next level, and that's fine. Like, I think he can be a really good utility fullback for this football team, somebody that actually is not a terrible blocker, and especially as an inline guy, he can lead the way. He's got good athleticism as well, and he's got good receiving ability. So he can be a dual playmaker for them and also give you special teams, especially early on. He's an older prospect. He could be a UDFA guy, and that's fine. If they want to pick him up off the waivers, you don't have to draft a fullback. I like Kuithe, and I think at this point in the draft, he's worth taking a swing at the end of the draft, just so that way you don't have to get him and worry about the waivers. And certainly somebody that I think McDaniels can use in his scheme and ISO packages and things like that. So let's recap everything up, because first off, I want to mention this. Like, with these drafts, it's not going to be perfect, and everybody's going to, agree or disagree on certain picks and players and things like that. You may say, oh, Armin Embu at number 4 overall, that's crazy. Ideally, yeah, of course, you trade down a little bit. If there's a quarterback-hungry team wanting to come up, like, that would be the perfect scenario. It just, a lot of times that doesn't happen, and you got to it takes 2 to tango, right? Who's the wants to trade up in front of the Jaguars? So those are some things you'll have to look at. And it couldn't happen. Like, I definitely believe it can happen. It's just, you got to, Elliott Wolf and Mike Vrabel, they're going to have to get in there and really work at this and see what they can do. But at the end of the day, like, to me, you got to find tackle. I do think tackle it's priority number 1. I would love Mason Graham too. I've gone with that pick before for this New England Patriots team in my prior mock draft that I did, and I still think that would be a dream scenario for this football team. It just comes down to, can you find 2 offensive tackles in free agency? Do you want to pay 2 tackles in free agency? Like, that, to me, is a little tricky. You could say, hey, we go get Ronnie Stanley or a Dan Moore, and then you go get a Morgan Moses at right tackle, and you rock with that, and you draft somebody on day 2. That's an option as well. I do think you got to get a tackle in the draft, get one young guy in here with elite upside and a guy like Armin Embu or Will Campbell, and then you get somebody in free agency like a Dan Moore, a Ronnie Stanley, etc., to fill one of those tackle spots. I just think that's the recipe to improve tremendously and quickly too. And the goal too, I think, for this offense would be just to go, for Doug Marrone especially too, is just to go from terrible to okay. Like, if you can go from terrible offensive line, one of the worst in the NFL, to just an okay 15 range offensive line, you're winning. That would be a win automatically. It's very unlikely, just being real, that you're going to go from terrible, worst in the league, to the best in the league. So that has to be our goal here, is just to improve to stability, make sure it's not a liability, that Drake May has enough time to get to playmakers. And speaking of that, that's their other need on this offense, is getting playmakers. And I feel like we did that with Chris Godwin, Trey Harris. Those 2 guys are going to immensely improve the floor of this room. Your hope is some guys like Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, they're going to take steps next season. Kayshon Boutte even takes another step. You got Pop Douglas, who will play a nice role for them. You got Hooper and Hunter Henry. You got Hooper back, and Henry's a reliable weapon as well. Showed good chemistry, both of those guys with Drake May. So I think in general, we did enough. I mean, DK Metcalf, Brandon Ayuk, those are guys that could be targets as well. So a lot of names to throw out there. You go find the guy that you really want and you feel is going to fit this team the best that you're going to be able to scheme around. And then we go on to the defense side of the ball. My priorities, defensive line. That's the number one need, I would say, between free agency and the draft and also a free safety. But defensive line, you got to get more edge talent. You can make the argument here we should go edge rusher a little bit earlier than this, and I wouldn't hate that either. You could swap the defensive tackle and the edge rushing picks. That's in play as well. I just decided to get a little more depth on that interior defense line, especially since we still have Anthony Jennings, Keon White. I want to make sure we see that development through Malcolm Koonce and DeMarcus Walker in free agency. Like that should be a better group combined with Milton Williams and Christian Barmore in that interior. Like those guys on the edges, they're going to get one-on-one opportunities. So that's why I feel a lot better about this edge room in general. And then in terms of the safety room, I do want to find that true free safety. And that's why I prioritize this. I'd love to get a young guy in there. We know we're paying guys like Kyle Duggar, Jabril Peppers. Let's go get that free safety role and Xavier Watts, who will be that playmaker in the back end. Linebacker, I see as more possibly a free agency need, but it could be a draft need too. That's one I kind of went 50-50 on. I could see it being a little bit of both too. We did get Bam Martin-Scott in the draft, but Jermaine Sherwood's going to come in and help them out tremendously, I feel like. Asante Samuel, as I mentioned earlier, let's make right, letting his dad go. We're going to bring his son in here. Let's keep him and be that number 2 cornerback. And we'll limit his liabilities as a run defender and a physicality because you got Christian Gonzalez. And that's why I just think it's the perfect scheme fit for a guy like Asante Samuel, Marcus Jones in the slot. We got Brandon E. Coles as some more depth. I mean, Alex Austin back, Isaiah Bolden. So yeah, it's a really solid group. And hopefully we improve this roster. I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff or a Super Bowl team, but it's a step in the right direction. And that's what this team, this organization, Mike Vrabel, and this new staff has got to preface it on. We want to make, strides to continue to get better. This is going to be a process. It's not going to be an immediate overhaul. I mean, your hope is, of course, an immediate overhaul, like a Dan Quinn and what they did and Alex Peters, etc. But most of the times, it's going to be a process. It's going to be a learning curve. So we'll see how it all goes. Let me know what you think, Patriots fans. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What would you do differently? And I hope you guys have a really good day. I'll talk to you later.